Hello again, and welcome to our ongoing Lenten Bible study. Today we're going to continue on basically what we have been talking about the last couple of times, and that is the problem of evil and how this affects all of us. And I think where I want us to start with today are two of the early verses in the Roman road to salvation. The first is for the wages of sin is death. This is where Paul is talking to us about the fact that there is sin and we all have it. The next verse is for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And the mental image that the Greek gives us here is that of an archer who is shooting arrows down range, trying to hit the target, but all the arrows just keep landing short of the target. No matter how hard we try, we cannot make it to the target of salvation, the target of goodness. And I want us to deal or think about this whole, for all have sinned and fallen short. All have sinned. Right now we have what's known as the cancel culture, where things people have said or done in the past is being brought back to light and is ruining their lives now. Things that they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 minutes ago. And everybody complains about, oh, I'm being canceled. Well, you can't be canceled if you didn't do something wrong, right? Now, perception has a lot to do with this. There's things that happened 20 years ago that might have not have been thought of as great, but at least were not considered, something that would ruin you socially. But our mindsets have changed, and we're having some really major social conflict and social wars in our society and in our country and in our schools and in our homes. We're dealing with, Florida just passed a law where you're not supposed to be able to use the word gay in schools. You're not supposed to acknowledge homosexuality as a possibility. As a matter of fact, if a teacher hears of a child claiming to be gay, they are supposed to turn that student in to the parents. And other likes that they've been shoplifting or something of that nature. That is one of those things we need to look at. We need to understand that Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence and did so much of the legwork for church and state separation in our country and started the University of Virginia and did all these great things, owned slaves. He slept with one of his slaves. Now, he loved her. Now, the thing is that maybe she loved him, maybe she didn't, but she didn't get a say in the matter. That's one of the things you have to remember. This is a great man. He did wonderful things, but he was a flawed man. He was a broken man, and he had sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. George Washington, the founding father of our country, the first president, the general of the Revolutionary Army, was a slaveholder. And we can talk about the very good attributes of George Washington, but we have to acknowledge that there were some bad attributes. If you ever read a biography, a true biography about Abraham Lincoln, you realize that this was a ruthless pragmatist. He did whatever he had to do at the time. He was a true scholar of not only military, but also the political world that he lived in. And he did a lot of good, but he also did a lot of bad. You can go throughout all of history. You can talk about any of us, men, women, myself, you. We can talk about these things where we may have a lot of really good things on our resume, but we all have those little dark secrets that we maybe don't want the rest of the world to know about. Those times when we have fallen short of the glory of God. And that is what makes the human experience and human beings so different than anything else in the known universe, is the fact that we have truly got the angel and the demon on our shoulders. And it depends on who we're listening to at the time. Now, when I was a child in the United States, there was a famous comedian by the name of Flip Wilson. And his catchphrase was, "The devil made me do it." And as I have been a minister, I have discovered that I think that has become the mantra for most of us, many of us. But here's the thing: we blame the devil for things that we have done ourselves. And if you ever saw Flip Wilson when he was doing this stuff, generally speaking, he would do something, and when he'd get caught, he'd say, "Oh, the devil made me do it." Well, no, the devil probably didn't have a whole lot to do with that. If anything, the devil may have had to give a little nudge, but then the character that Flip was playing did the rest of it. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We have all, pardon me, excuse me. We all have these broken moments in our lives, and we have to start coming to terms with this. If we're ever going to be able to understand evil in our world, evil in our lives, evil in the salvation story, if we're going to understand Jesus and the cross, we have to understand this first. We also have to acknowledge that the wages of sin is death. Now, what does that mean in today's setting? What are we trying to really say? And you have the fundamental Christians who would say it means literally what it says. The wages of sin is death, that you will go to hell. And hell is something that each of us have to kind of come to terms with. And what do we mean by hell? Where are we going with this? What does it mean? But generally speaking, in most Christian settings, most Christian denominations, what we're saying is that when we sin, we create a barrier. We create a barrier between ourselves and others when we sin against them, when we lie about somebody, when we steal from someone, when we murder, when we do those 6 commandments at the bottom of the list. When we break those, then we have broken faith with one another, and we have created barriers between ourselves and the other person. Now, when you look at the first 4 commandments in the 10 commandments, those are commandments dealing with our relationship to God, how we keep the Sabbath, how we honor God, how we do these various aspects of our faith. And that's when we have sinned against ourselves and God, when we have created barriers between ourselves and God. And this is really what it comes down to, is how are we having those relationships with God, with ourselves, and also our relationship with others. But even in our relationship to others, that still is a connection to God. We are creating barriers. And so the actual concept of hell is actually building up so many barriers that you are no longer in the presence of God. That is what hell is described as. It's weeping and gnashing of teeth. It is regret. It is regret because you are no longer in the presence of God. And the thought, the theology is that even in this age that we live in today, even though God may not walk among us physically where we can say, okay, there's God over there on 5th Street, what we can say is that God's presence is among us. The Holy Spirit is imbued into all humanity, that it is a part of all of us, and that we are not in hell, because even if we don't acknowledge it, God is still in our presence, and that's the part that you have to hang on to. But when the day of judgment comes, that's when you are no longer in the presence of God at all. And whether there's demons and pitchforks and all of that, that's not really what's being described here. It is the total absence of being in God's presence. That is how it is described. That is the regret. That is the boiling part of hell that is there. Okay. There's also the sin that we have against ourselves. You can sin against yourself. This is addiction. This is self deception. These are all these other things where you are hurting yourself, where you are breaking down who you are and building up walls within yourself. And sometimes some of the greatest sins we have are against ourselves. And sometimes the greatest sin that we have is the fact that we do not acknowledge or realize how we are hurting others, how we are tearing down those other aspects of other people's lives. How we may be breaking down their relationship to God and creating crises of faith for them. All of these aspects are tied together. So we are both angel and demon, sinner and saint. That is where we have to come to terms. And you cannot be saved if you do not know that you need to be saved. There's the story of like the frog, that you can put the frog in a pot of water and you can slowly turn the heat up, and the frog will never realize that it's being cooked. That's an extreme example, but it's a very true example. You don't throw the frog into boiling water. You throw the frog into lukewarm water and then slowly heat it up, and the frog never knows any different. How many times have we been that frog? How many times have we been in that boiling water where we never realized just how much danger we were in, whether physically or, more importantly right now, spiritually? How many times have we compromised ourselves? Most of us, we think we live pretty good lives, but the reality is none of us get through the day without doing something we know we shouldn't. There is regret every day for most of us in something we should have said or shouldn't have said or should have done or shouldn't have done. Paul says it very clearly when he says, those things which I know I shouldn't do, I do, and those things I know I should do, I don't. There is the crisis of humanity. There is the crisis we have with God, that we know we could and should do better. Now, in Jesus' time, what the Pharisees were trying to do was to get all of the Jews to not sin for one day. The reason they get upset when the disciples are walking through the wheat field and grabbing wheat and rubbing it in their hands and eating the grain as they walk by is because they knew about the Sabbath laws. And they were saying, if you guys would just get your act together for one day, if all of us could just get our act together for one day, nobody sins for one day, the day of the Lord will come. They truly believe that. They believe that if they could just keep things straight for 24 hours, from sundown to sundown, if we could do it one day, then God would come. What we in the Christian world, or what we in the modern world have come to terms with, is that, well, we can't do that in our own lives. We sure as heck can't get 8 billion people, which is where we're right under 8 billion people on this planet. Can you imagine trying to get 8 billion people not to do something? It's not going to happen. I mean, we can't make it through a minute without somebody doing something and messing it up. That's just, whether it's telling a lie, whether it's stealing money, whether it's killing someone, whether it's rape, famine, war. We cannot do it. It is not in our nature. We are broken. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. When we wrap our minds around that, when we accept that, when we truly grasp that we are in the floodwaters and that the boat is coming and we have got to get in the boat, that's when we finally start understanding the true salvation of the Lenten season, the true salvation of Holy Week, the true salvation of Good Friday, and the certification of that salvation on Easter morning. That's what we're talking about here. That's where we're connecting ourselves to, is how do we find ourselves in these troubles? But finally, how do we find ourselves out? And I'm going to end with an old ministerial analogy. You've heard this. It's been used thousands of times, but it needs to be a reminder to us as we are on this journey. A man finds himself listening to the radio, and he's being told that, hey, there are floodwaters coming, the dam is going to break, we're not going to be able to do this, you've got to get out, you need to, if you're living in this zip code, you need to go to higher ground. And the man who lives in that zip code prays to God, and he says, Lord, I have faith in you, I know that you are here for me, you will save me, I beg you, save me and save my house. And so he feels pretty good about it. Well, the water keeps coming up, and all of a sudden his car is underwater, and the water's coming up to his door. And a police officer comes by, and he's in a little John boat, and he says, "Hey, buddy, you got to get out of here. The water's coming. It's going to keep rising. You got to get out." And the guy says, "No, I've prayed to God, and everything's fine. Yeah, my basement's flooded, and my car's messed up, but I'm going to ride it out because I have prayed to God, and God is going to save me." Fine. Guy leaves. A few more hours come by, and now the water is up to his roof line, and he's actually having to sit on the top of his house. And a helicopter comes by and says, "Hey, guy, grab this rope. We got to get you out of here." And the man says, "No, I've prayed to God. I'm fine. I'm gonna stay with my house. My faith is sufficient. I will get through this time." So they finally have to fly off, and they leave him there. As the story ends, the man has drowned and he's dead, and he finds himself before God, his Creator, and he says, "God, I'm so upset. I prayed, and you promised me that you would save me. You promised me that I wouldn't have to go through this. Why did I die?" And God looked at the man and said, "I sent you a radio announcement. I sent you a man in a boat. Finally, I sent a helicopter for you. Why are you here? Why didn't you take the salvation I offered?" When we find ourselves before our Creator, and as we understand these things, will we be able to say, "Thank you, Lord, for the salvation you sent me"? Or will we be that same man looking at our God and saying, "I don't understand"? While God says, "I sent you messages. I sent you aid. I finally came for you myself, and you would not come." I hope that as you continue your journey to Jerusalem, that you have a wonderful Lenten season, a time of reflection, a time of hope, a time of growth. And I always want to remind you, and I truly mean this, if you have any comments, please leave them. And just remember that whatever you put on this is out in the internet, and it will be there for all to read. Whether you are Christian or Muslim or seeking or a person of whatever faith that it may be, or non-faith, you are welcome here. And we invite you to be a part of our community, not just for today, but all along the journey. And with that in mind, God bless, and we'll see you next time.